The fog that followed. I never should have taken that road. It was supposed to be a shortcut, a way to shave 20 minutes off my usual drive home. My mistake was thinking that saving time was worth the gnawing unease in my gut. But it was late, I was exhausted, and the winding roads of Hollow Pines always seemed empty after dark. That night, the fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen before. At first, it was just a thin mist, swirling in delicate tendrils across the pavement. But within minutes, it grew dense, swallowing the headlights, wrapping itself around my car like a living thing. The road signs disappeared, and soon, even the trees lining the highway faded into nothingness. It felt like I was driving through a void, the world outside my car nothing but an endless gray abyss. I slowed down, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The radio crackled with static, and I switched it off, leaving only the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic thunk of my tires against the cracked asphalt. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure didn't move. My headlights barely pierced the fog, but I could make out enough. A person in a long coat, standing unervingly still, their face obscured by the thick mist. I swallowed hard and rolled down the window slightly. "Hey, are you okay?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed up by the oppressive silence outside. The figure didn't answer. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something about them felt wrong. My gut screamed at me to drive away, but I hesitated. What if they needed help? With a shaky breath, I flicked on my high beams, and that's when I saw it clearly. Its face. Or rather, the lack of one. Where a face should have been, there was only darkness, a swirling void of nothingness, as if the fog itself had taken shape and pressed against human form. My breath hitched, and I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. But the figure didn't stay in place. It moved, slowly at first, then faster. It glided through the fog, closing the distance between us impossibly fast. I slammed the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my ears. The car fishtailed wildly before regaining traction, and I sped forward into the dense fog, my eyes flickering to the rearview mirror. Nothing. The figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Some trick of the light, exhaustion playing games with my mind, but deep down I knew better. The road stretched on endlessly. No signs, no intersections. Just the suffocating gray mist pressing in from all sides. I glanced at the dashboard. The clock wasn't working. The needle on my fuel gauge twitched erratically. I drove for what felt like hours, my eyes darting back and forth, expecting to see that faceless thing again. And then, I heard it. A whisper, faint, like a breath against the nape of my neck. "Let me in." My blood turned to ice. My eyes shot to the passenger seat, empty. But the whisper came again, closer this time. "Let me in." I didn't know what else to do. I gripped the wheel, my hands slick with sweat, and pressed the gas pedal harder. The fog thickened even more, and I could barely see the road beneath my tires. And then, I hit something. The impact jolted me forward, my heart leaping to my throat. I slammed on the brakes, breathing hard, my hands shaking. I couldn't see anything in the rearview mirror, but dread settled in my stomach like a stone. I had to check. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and stepped out into the freezing fog. The air was thick, damp, and clung to my skin like wet fingers. I circled around to the front of the car. Nothing. No blood, no dents. Nothing at all. But when I turned back toward the driver's side, the door was open, and there was someone sitting in my seat. My breath caught in my throat. The figure's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, its head tilted toward me. Slowly, painfully slowly, it turned. Its face, my face, stared back at me, a perfect reflection except for one thing. Its eyes were black voids, empty and endless. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, my phone slipping from my hand and vanishing into the fog. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted blindly into the mist, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I found myself back at the car. The driver's seat was empty, the door shut tight. Without thinking, I jumped in and locked it, gasping for breath. My hands trembled as I started the engine, the headlights flickering back to life. But when I looked into the rearview mirror, I saw myself sitting in the back seat, smiling. I didn't wait. I floored it, the tires screeching as I tore down the foggy road, tears blurring my vision. The whisper followed me, soft and insidious. You can't run forever. I drove through the night, never once looking back. The fog thinned eventually, and I saw the familiar sign welcoming me back to town. But I knew, deep down, I hadn't escaped. The fog would come again, and next time I might not get away. The fog on Hollow Creek Road. I should have listened to my gut that night. I shouldn't have taken Hollow Creek Road. But I was in a hurry, and shortcuts seemed like a good idea until they weren't. It was Halloween night, and I was driving home from a late shift at the diner. The air was crisp, and the streets were littered with fallen leaves, swirling like restless spirits in the wind. The radio played some old-school rock station, but I barely listened. My mind was on getting home, taking a hot shower, and crashing in bed. Then, I saw the fog creeping in. At first, it rolled in gently, like a low mist curling across the pavement. But within minutes, it thickened, swallowing the trees on either side of the road, smothering the glow of my headlights. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tightly. Felt wrong. I told myself it was just the season. Halloween always brought strange vibes, right? The fog was normal, but my gut churned uneasily. The road twisted and turned, and I realized I couldn't see the familiar landmarks anymore. No signs, no mile markers, just an endless tunnel of gray. I should have been close to the bridge by now, but it was like the road stretched further and further, leading me somewhere I didn't recognize. Then I saw her. A figure appeared out of the fog, standing dead in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. She didn't move, just stood there motionless, staring at me through the dense mist. I rolled down the window just a crack. "Hey, you okay?" My voice sounded weak in the eerie silence. The woman took a slow step forward. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the fog, and her dark hair hung in damp strands around her shoulders. She was wearing a tattered white dress, stained at the hem. "Please, help me," she whispered. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to hit the gas and get the hell out of there. But something about her eyes, they were hollow, empty, yet pleading, kept me frozen in place. I unlocked the door. "Do you need a ride?" She nodded slowly, and I noticed something odd. Her feet, bare, cold, dirty. I tried not to think about it as she slid into the passenger seat, the air growing colder with her presence. She smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic. "Where are you headed?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Home," she murmured, staring straight ahead. I pressed the gas and continued down the fog-covered road, the eerie silence stretching between us. Every so often, I'd steal glances at her. Her hands trembled in her lap, and her lips moved, as if she were whispering something under her breath. "You okay?" I asked again, forcing a smile. She turned to me slowly, and that's when I saw it. The dark streaks running down her cheeks. Not tears, blood. I nearly slammed the brakes again. "Jesus, are you hurt?" She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "It's too late. He's coming." My blood ran cold. "Who's coming?" And then the radio crackled with static, and through it, a low, rasping voice whispered my name. My heart pounded. I didn't recognize the voice, but somehow it knew me. I pressed down on the accelerator, speeding through the fog, desperate to get out. The woman beside me sat unnervingly still. When I dared to look at her again, her eyes were pitch black. Couldn't breathe. What the hell? Then the headlights flickered. The fog thickened, swirling in unnatural patterns, and shapes began to form within it. Shadows, tall, twisted things that moved in unnatural jerks along the roadside. My fingers were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The woman let out a shuddering breath. It's too late. The road ahead twisted, and suddenly I wasn't on Hollow Creek anymore. The pavement cracked beneath my tires, and the trees warped into gnarled, lifeless husks. I felt like I had driven straight into another world. Panicked. Where the hell are we? No response. And then I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. I screamed and jerked the wheel, sending the car skidding to the side. The fog parted just enough for me to see what had grabbed me. A face. Pale, sunken eyes. Lips curled back over jagged teeth. Something that wasn't human. It was in the back seat. I slammed the brakes and scrambled out of the car, falling onto the cracked asphalt. The fog swirled around me like living tendrils, and I heard the whispers closing in. The woman stepped out, her movements eerily slow. Her mouth stretched into a grin far too wide for her face. You shouldn't have stopped. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. The fog shifted, and I saw more figures emerging from the mist, dozens of them. Hollow-eyed, grinning, I turned and ran. I didn't care where, I just ran. The whispers followed me, skittering just behind my ears. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. The fog grew thinner the further I ran, and then, just like that, I was back. Back on the highway, back in reality. My car was gone. The road was empty. I staggered to the side of the highway and fell to my knees, gasping for breath. A trucker pulled over moments later, asking if I was all right. I told him everything, but he just shook his head. You took Hollow Creek, didn't you? I nodded and his face paled. Son, he said, glancing warily at the dark stretch of road. No one's driven that road in years. It's been closed since the accident. Accident? I asked. He nodded solemnly. A woman died out there. Halloween night. They say if you stop for her, you never come back. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I haven't driven that road since, but sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick on Halloween night, I swear I see her standing there, waiting. The fog that shouldn't exist. I never used to fear the fog. It was just another part of life in our quiet little town. A thick, rolling blanket that covered the streets every autumn. But after that night, I can't see fog without feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Because that night, something came with it. It started on a cold October evening. I was driving home from my friend Nate's place, taking the old winding highway that cut through the woods. I knew the road like the back of my hand. I'd driven it countless times. But that night, the fog was thicker than I'd ever seen. Curled around the trees and pressed against my windshield like a living thing. My high beams barely made a dent in it. I drove slowly, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. There was something about this fog, something heavy, oppressive. It wasn't just covering the road, it was swallowing it. The towering pines on either side of the highway disappeared completely into the mist, and the usual sounds of crickets and owls were gone. It was too quiet. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road ahead. I hit the brakes, squinting into the fog. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was a person. A tall figure stood motionless in the thick fog, wearing what looked like an old coat, its hood pulled low over its face. My headlights flickered, and for a second, I could swear the figure was staring directly at me. I swallowed hard and honked my horn. Hey, you okay? No response. I should have just driven around them, but something held me in place. A creeping, gnawing sense of dread clawed at my stomach. Then the figure moved, slowly, unnaturally, stepping towards my car. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas, swerving around them and speeding down the road. My heart thundered in my chest as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. My mouth was dry, and my hands shook on the wheel. I told myself it was just some drifter, some lost traveler caught in the fog. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. The fog grew denser, wrapping around my car like a thick cocoon. The trees disappeared entirely, and soon, I couldn't even see the road beneath my tires. I slowed to a crawl, my breathing shallow. I just needed to find a landmark, something familiar. That's when I saw the sign. It was an old wooden signpost at the side of the road, worn and faded. But the words carved into it shouldn't have been there. Welcome to Black Hollow. I slammed on the brakes. Black Hollow? That town didn't exist. It was an urban legend, a ghost story locals told to scare kids. A town that had supposedly vanished decades ago, swallowed by the fog. My heart pounded in my chest. No, 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 I whispered, shaking my head. This couldn't be real. I put the car in reverse, but the road behind me had vanished. Just an endless wall of gray. Panic gripped me. I drove forward instead, hoping, praying that I'd find my way out of this nightmare. And then I saw the lights, a faint, flickering glow in the distance. My gut told me to turn around, but my mind screamed for something familiar. Anything. I pressed on. The lights grew brighter, revealing an old gas station standing alone in the fog. I pulled up and killed the engine, the silence crushing around me. The gas station looked abandoned, its windows grimy, the neon open sign flickering weakly. I stepped out of the car, the damp fog clinging to my skin. Hello! My voice sounded too loud, too small in the empty night. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and something else. Something rotten. I pushed open the door, the bell above jingling softly. The place was empty, shelves covered in dust, old newspapers scattered on the floor. It looked like no one had been here for years. Then I saw the clerk. He stood behind the counter, motionless. His clothes were tattered, his skin pale and waxy. His eyes, God, his eyes were sunken, hollow, staring straight ahead. My stomach twisted in horror. I stepped back, knocking over a display of expired chips. The noise echoed, and the figure's head snapped toward me. I ran. I sprinted out of the gas station, fumbling with my car keys. I could hear footsteps behind me, shuffling, dragging. I didn't dare look back. I flung myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and gunned it. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, the fog twisting and shifting around the car. My headlights flickered again, and suddenly, I wasn't alone. Figures lined the road, dozens of them, standing still in the fog, their empty eyes watching me. Some of them were missing faces, others had stretched, unnatural grins. They whispered in a language I couldn't understand, their voices seeping into my bones. My hands trembled on the wheel as I sped faster, the car roaring through the mist. The road twisted and turned, and I had no idea where I was anymore. Panic clawed at my chest. I just needed to get out of the fog. And then, the road ended. My tires screeched as I slammed the brakes, stopping inches from a sheer drop-off. Below was nothing but swirling, churning darkness. I sat there, frozen, gasping for breath. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw them. The figures stood behind me, closing in. Their whispers filled the car, creeping into my ears, my mind. "You shouldn't be here." I screamed and floored the gas, but instead of falling into the abyss, the car jolted violently, and suddenly, I was back. The fog was gone, and the familiar highway stretched ahead of me. I didn't stop until I was home, slamming the door behind me, locking every bolt. The fog didn't follow me inside, but I swear, I still hear the whispers at night. The next morning, I checked the highway. No sign of the gas station. No sign of the signpost that said Black Hollow, but deep down, I know it's still out there waiting in the fog, and I pray I never find it again. The fog that follow. I've always loved driving at night. There's something calming about the empty roads, the way the world feels like it belongs only to you. But that changed last October. Now, I avoid driving at night altogether, especially when there's fog. It started as a routine trip. I was coming back from a late shift, exhausted and eager to get home. The highway stretched before me, an endless black ribbon cutting through the dense forest. I'd taken this road hundreds of times, but that night, something felt different. The fog rolled in slowly, curling around the trees like ghostly fingers. At first, I thought nothing of it. Fog wasn't unusual in October, especially in our small town tucked away in the hills. But this fog, it felt wrong. It was too thick, too fast, swallowing the road ahead in an instant. I flicked on my high beams, but they barely cut through the soupy darkness. The road markers disappeared beneath the swirling mist, and I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, probably a message from my sister, checking in. I ignored it. A shadow moved in the fog. I hit the brakes, my heart lurching into my throat. Something had been there, a figure, just at the edge of my vision, standing in the middle of the road. But when I squinted through the windshield, there was nothing, just the endless, suffocating gray. I exhaled, shaking my head. Fatigue was getting to me. I needed to focus, just keep moving. I pressed on, my tires crunching against the wet pavement, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. The fog thickened, wrapping around my car like a living thing. The trees that lined the highway faded into silhouettes, barely visible through the murk. Then I saw it again, a figure this time clearer, standing on the side of the road, motionless. I slammed on the brakes again, my headlights illuminating the figure just for a second. A tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and skin too pale, dressed in ragged clothes. His face was expressionless, staring straight at me. I blinked, and he was gone. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Get it together," I muttered, but my voice trembled. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the fog, a tired mind playing tricks on me. Then, the whispers started, soft at first, like wind slipping through the cracks of an old house. Then louder, surrounding me, pressing against the car windows from all sides. I turned up the radio to drown it out, but the station was nothing but static. The whispers grew louder. I clenched my jaw and pressed the gas pedal, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in that fog. But no matter how fast I went, the road stretched endlessly, the fog growing thicker. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something unseen but getting closer. Then the radio crackled. Through the static, a voice whispered, low and distorted, "You can't run." I nearly swerved off the road. My hands shook on the wheel, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. A shape loomed ahead, another figure, this time standing directly in the middle of the road. I didn't stop. I swerved around it, my tires screeching as I narrowly avoided hitting. What? Person? An illusion? My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I stole a glance in my rearview mirror and saw them, dozens of figures standing in the road behind me, all staring, their hollow eyes locked onto my car. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering words I couldn't understand. I floored the accelerator. The car roared forward, but the fog pressed in tighter, suffocating me, filling my lungs with icy dread. And then, the road ended. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding wildly on the wet asphalt. My car came to a shuddering stop inches from a sheer drop, a cliff that shouldn't have been there. I sat frozen, staring down into the black abyss below. My breathing came in short gasps. I should have been on the highway, nowhere near cliffs or drops. Had I taken a wrong turn? Was I even on the same road anymore? A tap on my window. I screamed. A face was pressed against the glass, pale and hollow-eyed. The skin stretched too tight over its skull. Its lips curled into a grin, revealing teeth too sharp, too white. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning, skidding wildly on the wet road as I tried to escape. My headlights flickered, and for a moment, I could see the figures lining the road on both sides, watching, waiting. Then the fog swallowed them whole. I don't remember much after that. Somehow I made it home, though I don't know how. The fog stayed with me the entire drive, and when I finally stumbled into my house, I locked every door, every window. The fog dissipated by morning, but the fear didn't. Now, every time I drive at night, I see them, shadows just out of sight, standing in the mist, watching, waiting, whispering my name. I don't take that road anymore, but deep down I know it doesn't matter, because the fog always finds me.